Well, I'm off to a terrible start since I sat in the wrong seat, which is the only real thing that I could have messed up, I think.
We'll make it work. It's the first time I've interviewed someone where I feel there are no introductions required, right? You all know John Green. You give him another hand. Okay. We're gonna talk for about 45 minutes, then we're gonna open it up to questions from you guys. The only thing you really need to know is there are microphones there and there, so when we switch into the question mode, just walk up to the front, there'll be a line, and we'll call on as many of you as we can get in before we run out of time. So, in the interest of not running out of time, my timepiece here, why don't we plunge right in?
All right.
Okay. So, you said last night, and just for those of you who don't know, John won the Innovators Award last night. And I'm just going to keep feeding you guys applause lines. All right, so, you said last night when you won the award that you felt you were not particularly innovative as a writer, you just told straightforward stories. But I want to ask you, don't you think that the sort of faith in storytelling and written stories is kind of innovative in our current world?
There's certainly something countercultural about it, about the idea that written stories are still valuable and still at the center of where we find value in culture. So I guess in that sense, maybe. I think in general, literature has remained kind of astonishingly innovative in the 21st century. Even when it's not formally innovative. I think that books haven't responded as dramatically to the disruption of the internet as maybe I expected. You know, we haven't seen as many hypertext novels and transmedia novels that I think we all thought were coming. And I think that's partly because books are an incredibly good technology, which is why they've lasted, for quite a while. It's not like a CD, which was 12 years old when it became irrelevant. Books have been
Betamax.
Right, Betamax, which is only 4 hours old. That's for the 8 old people in the audience. And one of the things that I'm proudest of about contemporary literature is that there is such breadth and depth to it. Even last night we saw a huge variety of books, really high quality books, nominated for these awards. And it reminded me, as it reminds me every year when I come to the LA Times Book Fair, that there's a lot of interesting work being done.
Do you think, just to zero in on fiction, do you think that part of that innovative quality or sort of the sturdiness of the technology has to do with the fact that so much of fiction is so internal in the sense that we're really reading about the heart and the soul of characters, their inner lives, and that the stories have so much to do with that kind of personality that comes out on the page?
Yeah, one of the magic of story for me is that you live inside of someone else, which is as close to a miracle as anything that I've ever directly observed. That idea that you can not be yourself for a while is almost a supernatural idea, or maybe it is a supernatural idea because, of course, you can't not be yourself. You're stuck inside the prison of your body, the prison of your consciousness. Your eyes are the only eyes that you'll ever see on earth. But when you read a story and you're living inside of another character, you don't feel like yourself. You do feel like you have a kind of empathy that isn't available to you on a regular basis. Like when I read Catcher in the Rye, I feel like I'm Holden Caulfield, or I feel like I know what it's like to be Holden Caulfield in a way that I can never even know what it's like to be the people closest to me, because I always see those people in relation to me. My friend, my wife, my children. Holden Caulfield exists in a world completely outside of me.
And there's that identification. It's interesting that you bring up Holden, because I was going to bring him up in a bit, but there's that identification, that
I always bring him up.
I tend to bring him up as much as I can also. There's that identification when you read that book, at various ages you identify differently, but when I first read that book at 13 or 14, I really felt that he was speaking not just to me, but for me.
Yeah. I'm sort of interested in the fact that I think fewer kids feel that way than you and I felt. I think fewer contemporary kids feel that way about Holden than you and I felt. I think they're more likely to see him as whiny, as entitled, as you know, a rich kid with rich kid problems, whose problems are therefore not truly legitimate. But I always want to grab those kids, and I mean this in a nice way. But I want to grab them like firmly by the shoulders, and I want to say to them, you are also self-obsessed and self-indulgent, and you also have problems that are not the most dramatic, important problems in human history, but they are still real, they are still important, they still matter, they are still, they demand your attention, and your pain is real, and I think Holden's pain is real too. I don't know what the question was because I feel so passionately about Catcher in the Rye and defending it that I've forgotten it. But yes, I identified with him. And then now as an adult, of course, you read that book, and back then I thought it was so kind of badass and cool, but now I read it and it's like the saddest book in the world.
I'm so glad you said that. I read it after Salinger died, I reread it, and I felt like, you're watching a kid whose world gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Oh, it's awful.
At the end, he has no other recourse except to sleep on the bench in the waiting room at Grand Central Station. I mean, it's a tragedy.
It's horribly, horribly sad. I find that all the books that I thought were funny and clever and cool when I was a teenager turned like Slaughterhouse-Five. I just reread that because we're teaching it in Crash Course Literature, and I just reread it, and I was like, this book that I once thought was hilarious is incredibly sad. Like, it's one of the saddest books I've ever read.
It's brutal.
It's horrible. And how did I read that? And I was like,
It's the and so it goes thing.
I know, I love it.
I think it's a toss-off, but really what it's saying is like, you're screwed either way. Right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. You're gonna die.
On the Road is another one. I don't know if that was a touchdown book for you, but
Yeah, it was.
You read it, the older you get, when you read it, you realize really how lost those characters are.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't even care what I do.
Yeah.
The other one for me is Sula by Toni Morrison, which I love. I mean, I love that book, and I've probably read it 10 or 15 times, but I read it in high school for the first time again. Thought it was like kind of a cool story about making cool but bad decisions. And, oh my God. Oh, it's just crushing. Yeah, anyway, I guess I can no longer see novels as anything but tragedies.
Well, I mean, that opens up a whole series of questions I want to ask you. Let me start by saying, one of the reasons I wanted to bring up Salinger is that in your novels, it seems that reading, whether fictional books, let's say An Imperial Affliction, or actual books, Seymour an Introduction, the General and His Labyrinth, etc., play important, not just thematic, but plot components. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can talk a bit about the importance of books as narrative, in constructing your narratives.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that books are things that are made by individuals. That, like, generally the way that we think of books is like somebody usually dead, usually white, usually male, like living in an ivory tower, writes this work of genius that comes out of his, like, there's a great line in Portrait of the Artist of the Young Man where he says that he's going to, like, forge the uncreated conscience of his race in the smithy of his soul. That's not how. First off, I don't think that's how the uncreated conscience of a race gets forged. But besides that, I also don't think that's how a book actually comes into being. I think a book is part of like a massive network. When I think of what genre is, I think of this like huge, the way that stories and people are just intertwined, and the way that everything can feed into a story. And so when I'm writing a book, I think of it as a book. I don't think of it as like, I don't like close my eyes and like see real life. And that maybe is not to the credit of my books, but that's just the way that I've always written. And so I see it in the context of other books, usually better books. Because there's no use writing, writing about the worst, the bad ones. So, I think about the kinds of books that these characters would love, and that's always for me one of the defining ways of imagining a character, because I know that I'm imagining a character. I know that I'm imagining a work of fiction, so what kinds of fictions would this fiction like is a really interesting question to me.
So you're a person who goes into someone's house and first looks at the books on their shelf?
Oh my god, yeah. It's like, it's all you need to know.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
When we bought our house, actually, in 2007 in Indianapolis, the people, I liked their books.
Is that why you bought the house?
Pretty much. They had so many bookshelves, and first off, that was a selling point. And I was like, these are smart, interesting people in Indiana. We could just we can just assume their lives. That was kind of how I was thinking.
Yeah, no. I've never. The requirement for me is always the house has to have long stretches of uninterrupted wall space so we can put up all the books. I'm glad you brought up this question of writing books. I wanted to follow up on what you said about you're not imagining the books in real life, but you're imagining sort of the books in this landscape of the book. I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think that I don't imagine myself as like writing a book. Like for me, writing a book is a collaboration with my wife, and it's a collaboration with my editor. Certainly, Julie Strauss-Gable, who's published all of my books, worked with me for 10 years, and like one of my closest friends. Like, it's a collaboration with the people who are going to design the book, create the way that it's read, the people who copy edit it, and tell me that it was Magritte who did Cecine Pazin-Pipe, not the artist I initially thought it was, things like that. It's a huge collaboration, but then there's also the collaboration of the person who first showed me Cecine Pazin-Pipe, and the person who created that work, and the collaboration of inventing the genre of the star-crossed lovers, and the collaboration which occurred over millennia and was done not really by individuals, but in collective storytelling. And it's to think of it as to try to separate it, to try to individualize it. And I know that in America we're obsessed with individualism and individualizing, but like to try to individualize a novel seems very problematic to me, because all of them, the good ones and the bad ones, were kind of in some way made by all of us. Like we were all, everything that we were doing artistically, feeds into the work that we're doing now. And I prefer to think of it that way, partly because it makes less pressure on me. Like it doesn't mean that I have to do something extraordinary. I just have to repackage stuff that other people have already made, basically.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
That's my writing advice. Steal. Don't steal. Don't steal.
All right, well, what is your process? I know you write a lot, but I would say you're kind of a slow but steady writer. I mean, the books don't come out every year.
Certainly not, no.
And there have been abandoned projects. I know you were working on a novel for a while called The Sequel, some of which ended up in Fault in Our Stars, some of which didn't. How does a book develop for you when you're sitting down to work?
I think a lot about characters and kind of the overall ideas about what I want to happen, where I want it to be set. Is sort of I start very vague, and then I sort of whittle my way down. But a lot of the way I whittle my way down is by writing, first drafts. And I usually delete. I mean, Julie and I usually delete maybe 80% of a first draft. So we're left with, I don't know, 5 or 10,000 keepable words, hopefully, and then a bunch of other words that aren't quite there for whatever reason, but we can sort of, or it needs to be set somewhere else, or whatever, So that's what makes the process slow. I'm not a slow writer. Like, I can write a bunch of words in a day. I just can't write a bunch of good ones.
Yeah, a friend told me recently about an editor who had put some bad sentences into a piece of writing. He said, I don't need any help writing bad sentences. I can do that really well by myself.
I'm awesome, yeah, I'm great at that. Yeah, but it is, that's the slow process for me, is in revision, but that's also that's for me, that's where the book becomes a book instead of, stream of consciousness narrative or whatever.
Right. Did you always mean to write YA, or when you were writing Looking for Alaska?
Yeah.
in some ways, I mean, I know you've been asked about this before. In some ways, it's the most risque of the books, for one scene in particular. Blowjob scene, okay.
Not really a blowjob.
Right. So, was that? I mean, were you just writing that as a book? I mean, because I agree with you, genre becomes a kind of straitjacket in a lot of ways that we use as just to sort of box stuff up, so we don't have to really think about what it is. When you were writing that book, were you conceptualizing it as a YA novel or just simply as a novel? What was your intent?
Well, I think genre can be a straitjacket. I also think it can be really useful and liberating. I like conventions of my genre. I like, when I was writing Looking for Alaska, I love the conventions of the boarding school genre, and I'm not one of these genre writers who wants to upend the genre or whatever. I like boarding school novels, that's why I wrote one. I like road trip novels, that's why I wrote Paper Towns. I like comic, thanks, no one's going to cheer for Catherine's. Thank you, I know it, you don't mean it. But I like the Southern comic kind of novel, and that's why I wrote Catherine's, and I liked, yes. I love star-crossed love stories, and I'm fascinated by them, and I didn't want to not write one. I wanted to write mine, if that makes sense. But yeah, to the larger question, I think, you know, I did write Looking for Alaska to be a young adult novel. I imagined it as a young adult novel pretty much the entire time that I was working on it. And, you know, at the time I was reading books. I was reading a lot of YA books, like stuff by, like, Angela Johnson and Lori Holt Anderson, who I'm a huge fan of, and stuff like, I don't know, like Melvin Burgess, who wrote this book, Doing It, that was 1,000 times dirtier than Alaska. And I just thought, you know, it never seemed like it was going to be an issue to me, which was very naive. I didn't realize that all of those authors were dealing with the responses to their work, because I just was reading them and I was like, it's great that you can publish this for teens. It's great that you can write books. It's great that you can publish books for your audience. You know, I mean, that's a wonderful idea, that you can publish books for the people you actually want to read them, instead of the idea that came before, which is that you have to publish books for adults and then secret them off to teenagers. So yeah, I always imagined that way, and I love writing YA. I really don't have much. I don't have much desire to write anything else, at least now.
But don't you think that that's, I mean, not to sort of conjecture on why the books are successful, but as to why the books are successful, that you are writing for your audience, directly to your audience, with respect for your audience, right? Instead of either writing down to them or writing around them in some way.
Yeah.
The issues that you're talking about are issues that teens are dealing with all the time.
Also that I am dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost, there is a measure of usefulness in it for me, for sure. But yeah, I hope so. I mean, I hope that I write for them without writing down to them, or trying to write around them. Yeah, like you said, that is really important to me. I don't know, that's up to them to decide, but I do try really hard to credit my readers with intelligence, and I find that when you assume that readers, not just teen readers, any readers, are intellectually curious and sophisticated and passionate, and you don't intentionally make things obtuse, they respond very generously to that.
It was interesting to hear you talk a couple of minutes ago about Fault in Their Stars as the star-crossed lover book, which it is, but I think in some ways all the books have some element of that in them.
Yeah.
Certainly, I mean all of them in various ways. So they are books about love, although they're not exactly love stories. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about kind of the importance of love, or the desire for love as a driver of these stories.
Well, I think a lot of it is probably personal. I mean, I was obsessed with romance when I was in high school, as both a reader and as a person. So I read a lot of romance. I love romance novels. I am a totally unapologetic fan of, like, Edwardian bodice rippers with Fabio on the cover. It's not a joke. I think they're great. And everyone's like, oh, it's the same book over and over again. And I'm like, no. Sometimes there's anyway. It's not always the same book over and over again. I also love light romance. I love, I love, and I think I would be much more likely to be called a romance novelist if I weren't a guy. Because I do, I like writing love stories. Fault in Our Stars especially is very much a love story. I mean, that's what's at the center of it. But I think part of it is that I just am really interested in it, and when I was a teenager, I was like obsessed with it.
Were you successful at it as a teenager?
No, of course not. I was epically terrible, and like Colin and Abundance of Catherine's got dumped over and over and over again. I could never figure out why, and always sort of, as you do, imagined myself as the victim. I imagined that there is like a perpetrator and a victim in a romantic relationship, and that I was always the victim because I was getting dumped, and then later realized why I was getting dumped. And then I realized that I wasn't really a victim. I was like a person in a bad relationship. And that was an important thing for me to understand, to like not see myself. Obviously, I wasn't in abusive relationships. I was just in dysfunctional relationships, which were largely dysfunctional because of me. So, yeah, I dated a lot, but usually quite briefly. And usually very chastely as well. Like, I mean, I would consider something to be a romantic relationship even if it had only involved holding hands. Even when I was like a senior in high school. It was looking back, I must have seemed very strange to everyone. But anyway, yeah. I was personally fascinated by it, and then also, I think there's a measure of, wanting to participate in this like big old conversation in novels about romantic love.
And I think it's also true that, the teenagers in the books are also they're looking for love, but they're not necessarily just looking for romantic love. They're looking for a way to belong.
Yeah.
They're looking for a place for themselves. In some way, they're looking for a family. I think about, say, in Alaska, right? The Colonel and Miles in Alaska become a kind of a family in a way that they're fulfilling things that they don't have in their own families.
Yeah, if you're a great parent of a teenager, they don't ever think about you. I never thought about my parents because they were good parents, so I didn't have to think about them. And if you're someone who has parents that you do have to think about, it's usually a pretty stressful thing. You need a family outside of your family when you're a teenager, or at least I did. I went to boarding school, so I really did. But you need a family, and you need to make that family, and it's the first, for most people, I think, it's the first experience they have with making family. That family isn't just something that you're born into, that family can also be something that you choose and find and build over time, and that's what makes those relationships so valuable, but it's also what makes them so fraught, because when a friendship is on the line, it doesn't feel just like a friendship is on the line. It's a family relationship. In some ways, it's on the line. It's one of the central relationships in your life, and to lose it is a huge loss. Whether it's a non-romantic relationship or a romantic relationship, it's still the specter of that loss looms very large over those relationships, because it's like losing a family member. It's like becoming estranged from someone in your real family. And I wanted to write about that in Will Grayson because I wanted to talk about the way that like best friends, like Tiny and Will Grayson are, they, to lose that best friend it's a much bigger deal than breaking up in a romantic relationship that isn't that important to you.
Yeah.
Like it's a huge, life-altering, central thing when you're a teenager.
Yeah, it's the defining pillar of your existence.
Yeah, those are the things that really hold you up. Now you don't recognize that your parents are also holding you up, right? I remember I called my parents like maybe twice my entire junior year of high school. Like I went home a lot, but like I was an awful, awful son, and I deserve whatever I get from my children. But
they'll have smartphones, so you can harass them by text.
Yeah, now I can text them. But I remember I did call when we had a student die at my high school, and it was just brutal. And it felt very much like a member of our very small family had been taken from us. And I remember I was like, I didn't know what to do. All of my friends were falling apart, and I was 16, and I called my mom, and that was the perfect thing to do. And the great good fortune of my life is that even though I never gave my parents really much of anything in terms of being a good child or not being a pain in the ass, that like she took that call, she listened and she responded lovingly, and like that's a very lucky thing to have.
Well, you have a scene in Alaska where Miles does call him, and his mother says, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "I just want you to take the call," right? So I'm curious, there are certainly elements of Alaska that are autobiographical, the boarding school stuff. As you said, you had a friend who died in high school. The other books may be more psychologically autobiographical, but less sort of, narratively autobiographical. How, as a first book, do you think that was helpful as a first book in terms of framing it out of your own life experience? And why did you move away from that as you kept writing?
It was helpful. I think it was hurtful to a lot of people I cared about, though. It was a small community. It is a small community that both my wife and I are part of. And I think I certainly had no idea the book would find a broad audience, but I should have accounted for that possibility. I should say that Alaska is fictional, and is very fictional. But, it is built around a lot of some stuff that happened to me in high school, and then a lot of the little details are taken from high school. It was very helpful as a writer, though, because the world was built for me. I'm not a particularly good world builder. Like, if I need to have Gus go to a gas station, I just have him go to the gas station by my house, And the fun thing about writing Looking for Alaska is that I knew that world so much. I knew the place where you smoked cigarettes under the bridge. I knew what the classrooms looked like. I knew the Swan. I knew the lake. I knew all of that stuff so well that I could sort of half tell you a story and half make up a story, which was a helpful transition to me, because I think before that I'd mostly been like a person who would regale you with high school stories when we would go to dinner or whatever.
Right. Now you, Fault in Our Stars has been made into a film. It's coming out in a couple months, about a month and a half.
June 6th. Opening weekend.
You've talked in some interviews about ambivalence about film projects, not about that in particular, but about ambivalence in terms of some of the books and film projects. I'm just curious about...
That's a very nice word for how I feel.
Yeah, so how do you feel?
In the past, ambivalence would have been a very charitable way to describe some of my feelings.
I'm just trying not to get you into trouble.
I appreciate that, but yeah, I mean, if any of them are here, I had a really charmed experience. It was amazing. It has been amazing. It's been a wonderful gift to my life and to that story. It started in LA about a week after the book came out. The people who ended up being the producers of the movie, Wick and Isaac, came to see our Nerd Fighter gathering on our tour in LA, and they said, we really want to make this, and I just, I talked to them about what was really important to me, that if you're going to make a studio movie with a girl who is wearing a nasal cannula in every scene of the movie, then maybe. But like, if you're going to make a studio movie where like, sometimes your lungs feel better so that we can get pretty pictures, no. And I think they cared a lot about the story. They were very serious about it from the beginning, and everybody that they brought on in that process, from Scott and Mike, who wrote the screenplay and wrote, one of the most faithful adaptations I've ever read, to Josh Boone, the director, and then the cast, everybody who came into that project, like, they really cared about the story, and they were really scared of the readers of the story. Like, they were genuinely afraid of disappointing you guys. And I actually think that's a really good place to make a movie from. But I think the reason, I really think that it's good. I might be wrong, I've been wrong before. Maybe it will come out and you guys will all be like, oh my gosh, it's the worst. I'm sure that you'll let me know. But I really think that it's good, and I think the reason that it's good has very little to do with me, and I'm not just saying that to be modest, I'm saying it because the reason that it's good is because Shailene Woodley and Ansel Elgort and Laura Dern and Willem Dafoe, they took the book very, very seriously, and they care so much about those characters. In some cases, I think they understand those characters in ways that I couldn't have, because I was busy looking at, from the perspective of Hazel. So I think that it's down to them. It's their movie, it's not my movie, but I'm extremely proud of the work that they did.
Well, it raises this interesting, because it is a separate thing. And Paper Towns, when it gets made, will be a separate thing. The idea that the books exist as the books, and then the movie becomes something else. I'm just curious your thoughts on that. It's the same story, basically, but the format changes everything, really.
Yeah, well, and the format changes everything, exactly, because a book is a crazy thing because you have to turn these scratches on a page into ideas that live in your mind and kind of only your mind, right? Like, it's not a collective experience. It's not, you don't go to the movie theater and sit with 200 other people and read a book.
Wouldn't it be great if you could?
It would be great, no. If you could all read at the same pace and you were all laughing at the same time, yeah, that would be awesome. You're all crying on, oh God, I just got to the sad part. But we don't read that way. We don't read at the same pace together. But that's also what's magical about books. So I think it's a very different thing. And I think part of the adaptation process, at least for me, is recognizing that and trying to honor it, that it's going to be a very different thing, inherently. And if we try to make the book, we're not going to make a good movie. And I'd much rather have a movie that people will respond to and feel good about. That said, I think one of the big concerns for authors, and this is a concern for me, is that, I will never again read Harry Potter without seeing Daniel Radcliffe. I will never again, and I think so. The visuals are so powerful. We are wired for vision in a way we are not wired for reading. We have been watching things since the moment that we became humans. We have not been reading things, except for the last 10,000 years, 8,000 years, or whatever. So I think it's so powerful that it can overwhelm the reading experience or change the reading experience, which is what I think some authors find problematic about it. And I do. I'm aware of that, and it concerns me. But at the same time, I feel like movies can be good, movies can be useful, and it's not fair for me to say that movies suck or whatever. Like, that's far too general of a statement to make. I have made that statement in the past, but I regret it, and I was wrong.
All right, well, I want to ask you, shift to sort of the digital realm. You said last night also that novels are important for various reasons, but that the internet too, or our interaction in digital space, can be a kind of a novel, and that the important thing is to think about how not to add to the noise. I'm paraphrasing you badly.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that.
Right? So I wanted to ask you about that, and about sort of as a way of getting into kind of your digital work.
Yeah, so what drives me crazy about the internet is that, a couple of things. First off, a lot of spaces on the internet are not super great at nuance, right? They're not, wait, let's pause and have an extended conversation about that before we decide how we feel about Ben Affleck playing Superman. Let's think about this for a few weeks, and then let's have a deep, difficult conversation where we stare each other in the face, and we have the topic, should Ben Affleck be Superman? Or Batman? I'm not good at this stuff. We're really bad at that. Instead, we're like, oh my God, oh no, Ben Affleck is going to be Spider-Man. and we lose it. And then poor Ben Affleck, who just wants to be the Green Goblin, is sitting at home being like, why do all these people hate me? Because he is a human being, and he has the internet. So he knows.
He's probably got a Google alert.
Yeah, probably has a Google alert for Ben Affleck Green Goblin, and then, just floods in, and it's all very negative. We're not good at nuance. We're not good at imagining others complexly. We're not good at considering the possibility that Ben Affleck is actually going to read our tweets, or even read our kind of collective thoughts on him. We're not good at that on the internet. And the other thing that we're really not good at is we're not good at hearing voices that are different from our own respectfully and generously. We're not good at assuming the best from the voice of the other. And that's really problematic to me, because then you have a choice. You can either live in a world in which you only hear voices that you already know agree with you, which is what most of us do, or you can live in a world where you fight and scream at each other about whether or not it makes sense to, have an individual healthcare mandate, and instead of having an actual conversation about that, all you do is scream and parrot talking points and try to make your enemy capitulate. That's not how people actually have conversations. Like, conversations are not about attacking one another. Conversations are about cooperation. Conversations are a kind of collaborating. And I worry that we don't do that well on the internet. We do it terribly. And I am struggling with this. I think we are all struggling with this, but I really want there to be better spaces online where we can assume the voice of the other we can assume the most generous way of imagining the voice of the other. We can share generously and openly, where we can disagree without fighting, where we can have constructive conversations, what real life used to be like. And, Hank and I have tried through, I'm glad that Hank got a woo. My brother Hank and I have tried to build when possible, a small community. I think we've only been effective in very small ways, so I don't want to try to, make us out to be anything approaching meaningful help on this front. But we've tried to build small communities where you can have those conversations. The Vlog Brothers channel is the only channel on YouTube where YouTube comments are good. Other YouTubers read the comments on our YouTube videos and they're like, who are all of these people? And that's really important to us. And then we've also tried through some of our other initiatives to build those spaces where we can talk about other things like history or literature or science or now with the art assignment, contemporary art. And that's really important to me.
So those, if you look at things like Crash Course, etc., on the one hand, those are educational, but they're also communicative, right? They're conversational. They bring in contemporary issues. I know we were talking last night about the Odyssey one and talking about sort of the sexism of that story in some way.
It wasn't sexist now.
Yeah.
Back then, it was downright progressive.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Just kidding, it was something like that. It's so crazy that they kill the ladies.
And children.
Yeah. They're just maids. They're just maids of all. I don't understand. I remember getting to that part in high school and just being like, well, that seems entirely excessive.
Yeah, it's gratuitous, I think.
Yeah, I mean, relative to the crime committed, I don't know, maybe a banishing.
Right. Although I did like the animated graphic of it. You know?
Oh yeah, no, they did a nice job at that.
But I mean, I guess one question I would ask you about this is how much of this, the growth of the nerd fighter community, Project for Awesome, etc., is, would you say, was it all organic? Was there any, once you and Hank started doing the vlogging, at what point did you realize you were onto something? Or did it just develop and you sort of rode the train?
I mean, a little with column A, a little with column B, I guess. But like, we knew we were onto something. Hank's, when we were in like 2007, we made like 100 videos and they'd been watched an average of like 400 times, which was great. We had a really active community of 200 or 300 people. That was awesome. And then Hank made a song about the last Harry Potter book that went viral. And suddenly we didn't have 400 viewers, we had 7,000 or 12,000. And that's when we thought, oh, this could be not just a thing where a small group of people who call themselves nerd fighters do crazy little projects together, but it could be a much bigger thing. And it was just a few months later that we did the first Project for Awesome. That said, it has also been organic in the sense that, you know, there's a lot we don't do. There's a lot we turn down. There's a lot of ways we don't want to grow, I guess. I still make Vlog Brothers videos in my basement with this, you know, incredibly inexpensive camera.
And you're shooting now. I mean,
I am. Yeah. I don't have like a fancy mic or anything. Like, I don't know how to do any of that stuff, unfortunately. I can't really edit video even after 8 years of doing it. Astonishingly incompetent at my day job. But we knew, Hank and I would talk all the time about how we wanted to make educational video on YouTube, proper educational video that we could make in a way that we could distribute it for free forever. And you know, there's great resources like Khan Academy, but there's, you know, and I love Khan Academy, and we work with Khan Academy, they distribute Crash Course, they're awesome. But, you know, their videos are, you know, Sal with chalkboard, essentially. And, you know, they're pretty slow, they're for engaged students who want to learn, which was not me in high school. And we wanted to make stuff that was, you know, high energy and visually interesting and lots of animation and therefore much more expensive. And so we always wanted to do that, but it was only when Google gave us the chance to do it by giving us the grants necessary to create Crash Course that we were able to do it. So it's a mix of, yes, it's organic in the sense that like we were making videos and we were like, oh, the most fun ones to make are the educational ones, but there's so much work and they could be so much better if we had money. And then we had money, so we could do it.
Now, a more cynical person or more cynical writer would have just used it for audience development. You've really used it, I think, to use the books to get out into the world. I mean, we talked a little this idea of how does literature or how does writing kind of create a space in the world for that kind of community, going back to that empathy that readers have with characters. I just wanted to talk a little bit about your sense of community building and the importance of it, both in terms of the internet and in terms of what you're trying to say in the books.
Well, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say in the books is that your community, when you're a teenager, even though I think a lot of times you're told that it isn't valuable or it isn't real or it isn't going to last or, you know, this isn't forever, well, nothing's forever. It's a ridiculous thing for adults to say, like, oh, you won't be friends with them forever. When someone says that to you, you should just be like, well, you're going to be dead. You know, in like 30 years, you know, like what a ridiculous thing to say, this is going to last forever. Of course. I never, you know, like you never claimed otherwise. What you're saying is that like this matters to me. Maybe it will matter to me in 20 years, maybe it won't, but like, I know that it matters. I know that it's important. And I do, and I think lots of young adult novels are great at this. I think this is one of the great things about young adult literature, is that they are a way to honor and respect the meaning and importance and centrality of the peer relationships that teenagers have. And to say to them, you know, this is real and this is important and it matters and it's vital, and you know, when it's great, it's amazing, and when it's terrible, it's truly, truly terrible, and no one should minimize that for you. In terms of online, to be honest, it's a good question to be asking right now, because we're in this weird period of growth that's also inevitably a difficult period, because what does it mean to be a nerd finder when there are lots and lots and lots and lots of people who watch our videos and lots of people who read my books, who probably maybe don't identify as nerd fighters, don't think of themselves as a nerd fighter, like don't do this the first time they see me or whatever. And that's, I mean, I want to be clear, like I'm not mad at you if you're not a nerd fighter, like thank you for reading my books, I don't care. But if you want to be a nerd fighter, I want you to be able to feel like you're part of this community that's really special to so many of us. And we're trying to figure out ways to do that, because I think that it gets harder when there's more attention to it. We were very lucky as a community for a long time that we got to do our work pretty much in a total vacuum. Like no one in like the proper media knew what we were, you know, like no one ever thought about us, and that was kind of great. We were very resentful of it, of course. But looking back, it was good. So we're trying to figure that out now, and we're trying to listen to nerd fighters talking to us about what makes them feel like part of the community, what makes them feel close to people, and also how we can build, you know, spaces for engagement for them that can also become, you know, that can also exist offline. Because I think some of the best part of it for me is these really close friendships that have emerged within the community, or marriages or whatever. And I want to facilitate more of that, said the CEO of Match.com.
All right, I think that's a perfect note to bring you guys in a little bit. So if anyone has